Parodi, and I'm going to present my research, Bias Against Women's Victims of Sexual Assault, a comparative analysis of approaches in the Chilean Judiciary and Hispanic-American literature. So this research was motivated by the objective of studying bias against women victims of sexual assault. There is already a very broad literature supporting the fact that this is something that is present in various spheres of life. And I was particularly interested in studying it, comparing it to different spheres, which are the legal realm and the literary realm. So the purpose of this study is to bridge legal discourse with fictional narratives to see what they can both tell us about how bias against women victims of sexual assault works. This will be the agenda of the presentation, and the objectives to main are to analyze bias against women victims of sexual assault in two genres, one belonging to legal discourse, which would be a court decision, and another to literary discourse, which would be a novel. And to bridge both of them in order to examine if they share the same approaches or if they present differences and why. This will be the core of the theoretical framework that I will use for the analysis. I believe that these models, theories, myths, and epistemologies are at the core of bias against women victims of sexual assault, and I hope I will be able to explain why. Okay, so first of all, theories of rape are very important for promoting bias. I believe that the conservative theory of rape is the most important for understanding bias. This theory presupposes a patriarchal society where women are deemed men's property, and rape is understood as a violation or an affront to the man that owns women. So this is also understood as an affront and a violation of the heteropatriarchal ties of society. So it's also understood as an affront to society's fabric. This model engages in victim blaming because it understands that men entrust women with taking care of their sexual indemnity. So if there is a violation of their sexual indemnity, it's viewed as the women's fault. Okay, models of heterosexual interaction are also important. According to Louis Vinot, there are mainly two of those. So I'm going to focus only on the first one, the problematic one, which is she names male aggressive sexuality. So this model presupposes that men are naturally conquest-oriented and aggressive and violent in sexual interactions, and that women are naturally passive and display token resistance. So the problem with this model is that it blurs the line between consent and sexual aggression, and that it establishes a disproportionate burden on women to prove when they were actually assaulted instead of engaging in a consensual interaction. Okay. Thirdly, rape myths are fundamental for studying bias, and I believe that the four first ones in red are the ones that are more pervasive and that do the most damage and hinder most of rape prosecutions. Rape myths are false beliefs that hinder our true understanding of how sexual assault really works. Okay. And lastly, patriarchal epistemologies are also important for understanding bias. So according to feminist philosophers, Western philosophy ascribes more epistemic authority to men to the detriment of women by creating different gendered cognitive styles where women are deemed more intuitive and emotional and contextual, where men are deemed more rational and analytical. Okay. The methodology, the corpus of the methodology will consist, like I said before, of two texts. So the first, representing legal discourse, would be a 2004 Chilean court decision of a rape trial. And literary discourse will be represented by a novel of the movement, the Latin American boom, which will be The House of the Spirits. Okay, just to give you a sense of what this case was about, the victim of this case was a Chilean woman from the south named Giovanna. So she was a woman who had a fiancé. She was going to marry soon, and she had a son from a former partner, which wasn't this man. So on a night, she decides to go to a nightclub, and she dances with some friends, and she meets an acquaintance, and she dances with this acquaintance until approximately 5 a.m., and then they go to his house. They talk, they have some drinks, and eventually he proposes sex, and she's not interested. She insists that she's not interested, but he ends up forcing her he rapes her, and she's eventually able to repel the attack, and she runs off naked to the street. So now I'm going to proceed to analyze this court decision. I have selected some quotes from it that I'm going to analyze in detail. So first, all throughout the ruling, we can see that the conservative theory of rape is present in this written ruling, in the sense that rape is an affront to the man who owns the woman, right? There's not interest in her own subjectivity or in her own experience of the trauma, but in the affront that is caused to men, right? So from the outside, we can see in the ruling, what is a woman doing at a club alone without her boyfriend? Why did she accept to go to the house of a man she met only recently, right? So from the beginning, there is this sort of reproaching, this chastising her for putting her sexual identity in jeopardy, right? That is not something that is of her interest, but of the man that she's promised to marry, right? There's also, here we can see that there's an emphasis on the fact that she has had previous sexual experience, right? Which unfortunately makes her less likely to be a victim of sexual assault, right? There's this myth also of the ideal victim was a woman who, before the aggression, didn't have alcohol, was practically a virgin, had what we would say a good reputation. So all of these myths are also playing against her because they know that she has a conflict with other men and she already has sexual experience. Okay, so also something that we can see in this ruling is the rape myths, that rapists are strangers, right? She went to a person's house she already knew. It's worthwhile to ponder, was she just going to listen to music, right? So there's this extreme skepticism that people that we know are not going to be the people that assault us, right? And what is so interesting about myths is that they directly contradict what research says about how sexual assault works, right? A disproportionate amount of cases of aggression comes from people that we already know, even disproportionately from our own families. But these myths are really ingrained, particularly in the legal system, right? So, and again, we see this reproaching of her, this reinforcement of the fact that she had another man that she was promised to, and she was irresponsible to put her sexual indemnity in jeopardy, right? We're talking about a person who was going to get married in 1 month. Also, this is a very classical and sort of landmark myth of sexual assault cases, the fact that women lie about rape, right? In the first slide, we could also see the fact that they were saying, this is hysteria, this is a spite, this is not sexual assault, right? The attitude of the alleged victim was condimented with episodes of crying without tears, hand trembling, facial rectors, voice inflection, and a fake fainting episode before reaching the court. Also, inaccuracies were evident in the testimony she delivered to law enforcement, prosecutor, and doctor. Her narrative is without a doubt full of hyperbole and manipulation. She manages the situation of her will. So she actually did change some details in her account, but this is completely normal. This is what research says about victims of sexual assault, that they always change their narrative a little bit. They can't remember exactly everything that happened in its most accurate version. And this is something also completely normal when victims of sexual assault display PTSD, right? But what is really interesting is that the defendant also did the same. He changed his statement several times, as did his witnesses. But for the judges, this makes perfect sense and is completely reasonable, right? But also, at this time of development of proof, what the accused declared on trial makes sense and is reliable. He was pushed to declare against his will and accommodate his claims to what the plaintiff has said and her testimony to the investigating police. Right? So when the man changes his narrative, there is understanding, it can be portrayed as rational, but not when women do it, even though they have all the reason to do it considering what they went through. And lastly, in terms of patriarchal epistemologies, when I said that she ran off naked to the street, it's completely pathologized by the judges. They think that this is sort of a crazy attitude, and it doesn't make sense that she ran to the street although she was being sexually assaulted. But they do exactly the opposite again with the defendant, but they think that his conduct is completely rational and analytical and doesn't make sense with the conduct of someone that just committed a crime. Okay, I'm going to leave this one for the questions just the sake of the time. And finally, sexual assault and literary discourse. Literary discourse is a very different discourse from legal discourse. It doesn't have many of the constraints that a legal discourse has, and it doesn't have many of the purposes that it has. But we will see that they do share some aspects. Okay? So in terms of the larger movement that this novel belongs to, the Latin American boom, there is a very pervasive own myth of this movement that is that when men go to the countryside or to rural areas, they sort of go through a process of transformation where they cannot hold their sexual desires, so the countryside sort of changes their sexual drive and they can't confront it, they can't control it, and sexual violence usually takes place when men go to this setting. So just a little summary of this case. It's a novel that is early 20th century, semi-colonial Chile in a rural finca. This is the story of a family that lives in the capital but has to move to the rural area. And first the father moves by himself to this area. In his finca, there are many tenants that live there. They're completely poor, uneducated, and lack any opportunity to have their property or to decide for their will. The semi-colonial law completely dominates them and does with them as their please. Okay. So I'm going to analyze two excerpts of this novel. The first part when he goes through this process of primal transformation because he's in the countryside, and then I'm going to analyze the rapist. Okay, so little by little he let himself be conquered by rusticity. He stopped shaving, cut his hair only when he reached his shoulders. He was slowly becoming a barbarian, right? So this also affects his sexual drive, right? He would wake up tense with his penis like an iron rod between his legs, angrier than ever. So he steadily became notorious. Nothing could quench it. When he began to look with concupiscent eyes at the birds in the coral, the children played naked in the orchard, and even at raw breath, though, he understood that his virility would not be soothed by priestly subtlety, right? So this idea that his sexual drive is so terrible, so pressing, so repressible that even he starts being interested in food. Okay, so he finally is able to sort of get rid of this desire by raping a 16-year-old tenant, a very poor, uneducated girl who is also of indigenous descent. This case is very complex because her identity is so intersectional. So the urgent desire that had been tormenting him for so many months, finally is able to get rid of that with her, and we also can appreciate this words that sort of portray him and depict him as an animal, right? He grabbed her with an animal-like grunt, right? He grabbed her with a single stroke of his hand. And when he raped her, he did not remove his clothes, he attacked her savagely, right? This emphasis was savagely and brutality. The young girl was a virgin, but neither Panja's humble origin nor the pressing demands of the desire allowed him to rape her. Right? So we can also adapt certain other rape myths and other theories to this case, which is more intersectional, right? So the myth that a man cannot rape his wife, here we can see maybe a man cannot rape his tenant, right? Because they are already his property in this sort of semi-colonial world, right? And the conservative theory, where rape is an affront to the men who own the women, we can adapt it with a feudal twist, where this semi-colonial lord doesn't owe anything to anyone, especially not her father, because these women are already his property, right? Her family's outraged, but they can't do anything against his enormous power, right? So in terms of the discussion, we can say that most of the discourses foster notions of rape that are based on the conservative theory and on rape myths, but focus independently on different aspects, right? Legal discourse painstakingly examines women's behavior, questions her credibility, and engages in victim blaming, while literary discourse does not engage in victim blaming, but addresses the inevitability of rape as a consequence of brutal male libido, right? Also, both of these discourses discard the voice of the victim, although in different ways. And finally, this question, why does legal discourse behave in a different way from literary discourse, right? Since they have a different purpose, I think time's up, so maybe we can talk more about this on the questions. Thank you so much.